trees tonight, so.
Well, we could.
I'm gonna mention vegetation as much as I can.
Yeah, we'll just use the opposite word, vegetation.
Tree over there. And is that good? Did they prune it well enough?
Tree over the Trinidad Art Gallery that has to be removed most likely.
Oh, yeah, I saw them looking at it the other day.
It's the one that used to be a hat.
No, that was wrong.
Yeah, they did.
It's the one, it's the one just down the,
Or
down the parcel.
Paradise, right?
Yeah. And I can't, mercy on that one. Howdy. How are you? Well, okay.
The tree was.
Tree is Trinidad, right? That's what we know for.
Don't block you.
Okay, well, since we're all here, then I think we, so. Are you ready, Anton?
Yes.
Good evening, everyone. This is the regularly scheduled meeting of the Trinidad Planning Commission for Wednesday, January 18th, first one of the year, 2023. First item on our roll call is, first item on our agenda is roll call. Could I have the roll, please?
Commissioner Hopkins.
Yep.
Commissioner Hickman.
Here.
Commissioner Johnson.
Here.
Commissioner Cole.
Present.
Here. Thank you. Just before we get into the rest of the agenda, I just wanted to thank Mr. Slay, Dr. Slay, to be a member of our little group here. And welcome.
Thank you.
And if you could maybe give us just a short, brief background and your interest in the Planning Commission.
Sure. Just first of all, thank you for the opportunity to speak, and thank you for those folks who ended up appointing me to the Planning Commission. My name is Christopher Slay, and I live on Underwood Drive with a wife and 2 kids, along with my father Chuck, who you may have seen around town riding his tricycle. Right. So we've been here for 6 years or so, and plan to stay for the inevitable future. And I look forward to having a chance to leave my mark on the community. And so, thanks for having me.
Thank you. Glad you're here. Thanks. Okay, the next item on our agenda would be approval of minutes, but since we do not have any minutes, we'll move on to the third item on our agenda, which is approval of the agenda. We have 4 items that we will be discussing, deciding, or taking action on this evening. Do I hear a motion to approve the agenda?
So move.
Second?
Second.
Moved and second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? People of the agenda is approved. Next item on our agenda is items from the floor. This is an opportunity for anyone in the from the public to address the Planning Commission on any item which is not on the agenda this evening. And we would request that, unless otherwise specified, that you limit your comments to 3 minutes. Are there any public comments this evening? All right, hearing and seeing none, we'll move on then to our agenda items. And the first agenda item is election of chair and vice chair, discussion decision on the election of a new Planning Commission chair and vice chair to serve a 2-year term. And I'll turn it over to staff for a brief discussion.
Thank you. So yeah, just following the election cycle, the Planning Commission elects its own members, someone to chair the meetings and the vice chair. So that person kind of runs the meeting. You've seen Richard in action, keeps things moving along, follows the agenda, calls for order when necessary, that sort of thing. And so the city did amend its regulations for electing a planning commission chair last year, so that it can really be anyone. Previously, there was a limitation that it could be someone who had already served. And so we had a lot of turnover, and so that meant that someone really new would be the only one qualified. So now it can be anybody, and it's a 2-year term as long as that person.
Okay, thank you. So this is, as staff indicated, this is kind of an informal approach to this. And so we can have a discussion on if there's anyone who would like to volunteer for either one of the positions, and or any other discussion that you would like to have about this agenda item. Well,
I'm in favor of keeping status quo.
I'd second that.
well, I certainly appreciate that. I think thank you for your vote of confidence. I appreciate it. I appreciate it. But I think what I would recommend, at least if you all would agree, or we can have a discussion about it. I think that Commissioner Hakkinen is ready to move up to the position of chair. I certainly would endorse him if he is willing to do that. And are you okay with it?
Yeah, I'm fine with that.
Yeah, I think he's certainly demonstrated he's quite capable. And the other thing that's nice is that he lives within the city limits. And so given the opportunity to have a chair who lives within the city limits, which has not always been the case, and certainly not the case in my case, but it's always good, I think, to have someone from inside the city as the chair. Gives them that little bit more physical locality that is I think good. So if you're willing to step up.
I am. I do have one comment. Just given the nature of my employment, I frequently, I mean, I know I can tell certainly what meetings I definitely will not be in town for, and whether or not I can arrange to do that differently. So we're going to talk about the meeting format later. I don't think that's an insurmountable obstacle. Vice chair for a reason, right?
Mm-hmm.
That'd be the only, just for clarity.
Okay. Thank you. Appreciate your support and your desire to help. Okay, so for vice chair. Well, I'll make another proposal to move things along. And I appreciate what you said about there may be some issues, or maybe sometimes when you are not available, and certainly we don't want that to delay us. So if everyone is acceptable with it, I will step down as chair and I will become vice chair, and I can then fill in for you when you're not available. And I think that will keep the continuity really well, if that's acceptable to everyone.
I support that.
I support it.
Okay. Sure. Okay. I guess we should have a formal motion on it just to be on the safe side. So you and I probably need to abstain. So, but there's still a majority that can vote. So do I hear a motion?
I move that Commissioner Hakkinen become chair and Commissioner Johnson become vice chair.
It's been moved and second.
Second.
Moved and second. Any further discussion?
Public comment.
Yeah, I was just going to get to there, but that's fine. We can have public comment now if there's any public comment.
Just thank you, Richard, for chairing the planning commission. Thank you all for being on the planning commission. I've worked with 4 out of 5 of you, and outstanding. It's always a pleasure to come here, and so I really appreciate you continuing as vice chair, Richard, and thank you, Aaron, for stepping up. You guys do a great job, so thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment? So we have a motion on the floor. It's been moved and second All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Okay, moving on to our next agenda item, which is meeting format, discussion decision on the preferred meeting format, hybrid, in-person only, or Zoom.
Yeah, so when the planning commission elected to move forward with hybrid meetings, they wanted to try it for 2 meetings and then revisit the issue. So we've had 2 meetings to experience the hybrid format. It has not been further discussed at the city council level, but seems like that's what they're going to continue, at least for the foreseeable future. It definitely is. It's more work for staff. You can see there's a lot of equipment, a lot of wires. There's definitely some upgrades the city could do to make it a little bit smoother. And I think if the city council wants to continue hybrid meetings long term, it should probably invest in some additional technology. But I think it's, it's great for public involvement. It's the state has extended the allowance to attend remotely, even for commissioners. So unless Aaron's actually out on fire, he could still participate from where he is remotely. So I think continuing with hybrid is a good thing, unless
Any questions or discussion with staff from the commissioners? It sounds like, from the lack of comments, that it seems to be our preference to stick with the hybrid. And since we do, as you can see, have some people that do tune in remotely, I think that's good. I like the idea of making certain that the public has every way in which they can participate. And I think that's not only good for the public, but it's good for us too, so that we get lots of input and feedback from our public. I like the idea of a hybrid. I would certainly endorse the idea of the city maybe making some investment in a little bit more permanent arrangements for the meeting, so that Anton and others don't have to spend so much time tearing down equipment and setting it back up for different meetings. But I appreciate that. I also think that we should make note that, as mentioned in the staff report here, that when we have workshops or other types of meetings, such as workshops, et cetera, that are not formal meetings, that we do everything we can to do that in person and not have to use or exercise staff any more than is necessary. So I just want to make sure that we're all. Any other comments, questions for staff or on that recommendation?
The only ask I would have, I guess, is to reach out to, I guess, the attorney and just find out long-term for me. I know we're covered under the executive order right now, but that at some point may sunset and we might revert back to the old rules. It's my understanding that there's a way to do that, but involves me noticing and having the agenda posted there. There's for Brown Act purposes, there's reasons and I would need to work with my employer to make sure that someone could come in, on the off chance. And so just getting some kind of a read on making sure I know what that would look like so I can comply with that.
So yes, the executive order sunsets at the end of 2023, but the state has already enacted new legislation about it.
Oh, cool. Okay.
Sunset. There are no rules.
And is it my understanding now that if you are in a remote location that you do not have to post it?
That's correct. That's what the executive order, because it made it difficult. Well, one, we didn't really have the technology to do it very well with the public being able to see the person. But yes, it had to be included on the agenda, the address. it had to be open to the public. So if someone was staying in a hotel, for example, they had to post it on their door and out. So the logistics were a little bit difficult. So we did do that occasionally, but not very often. So it'll be nice to be able to use that.
And one more, you talk about it here, but the issue of quorum, I mean, within city limits, without city limits, I know I found some language on that when I was researching it, that, you know, technically a certain number had to be physically within the jurisdictional boundaries to create a quorum. Just making sure we know.
Okay, I will look into that. I assume that has also, I will look at that.
Okay.
That's a good question.
Any further comments?
Yeah, maybe this goes without saying, but it would be my preference that if the commissioners are in town, that they do try to attend in person.
Do we know that? Okay, if there are no other comments at this point, I'll open it up to the public for any comments on this agenda item. All right, hearing none and seeing none. Let's see. I don't think we need a. Yeah, it's by affirmation. We've said that this is what we'd like. So thank you very much. Okay. Next item on our agenda. Moving on here is the housing related zoning ordinance update. Discussion decision regarding a zoning ordinance amendment to add provisions for reasonable accommodations to the zoning ordinance. Continued from our last meeting in December of 2022. Yeah.
Thank you. So there was a lot of edits and changes to the ordinance made at the last meeting, but there were some points were discussed. So one was the issue of whether to have different second homes. And so not a second unit per se, but where it's not someone's primary residence, they're only there part-time. So I did research the issue a little bit. I had only found that one ordinance that had it. I found some guidance that included court cases on accommodations. I didn't see anything about that in that guidance. So it might just be something that's not tested yet. You know, I pointed out a couple other examples that might come up. It's not just someone's vacation home, but you know, maybe it's someone's primary residence, but they want to make a change for a family member that comes to visit or something like that. So my suggestion is to just keep it for all residences and not differentiate between the two. And in researching other ordinances, I did come across a couple that had some sort of tiered approach where certain levels of improvement. So, you know, if it was something like a setback exception or height exception or something like that, that would be administrative. And something that might be like an exception to a density requirement or a change of use, that would require a higher level of scrutiny. There's some sense in that, but this, one thing to keep in mind is that those types of like certainly a density change is going to require a coastal development. So that would qualify for administrative approvals that would have to. Height change would also require design review. So I think in Trinidad, most of these projects would require design review with coastal development. So they're going to come to you anyway if they're a larger project. So I don't think that's really necessary. I was just pointing out that it's an option. Another issue that came up for discussion was the application of findings F and G, which is the last meeting that he had met. So that's frustrate application of city ordinances or an undue financial burden. So I did provide I found some guidance from HCB that addresses those issues a little bit more. So, I found some other ordinance language that provides a little bit guidance, and since at this point, I would be the one making these decisions, I like more guidance, I think. It would be nice to help with making those findings, so the language in italics for both of those findings, so I would add the sort of subset under those findings. That could be useful. Other than that, I think we're getting pretty close to having a good ordinance. I did send a draft to Coastal Commission staff, and I have not heard back from them, but I do have now a monthly meeting with Coastal Commission staff set up. So we have a lot of zoning and general plan amendments that we're working on. So access staff, Coastal Commission staff on a regular basis.
Thank you. Any questions or clarification requested from staff? Right, hearing none. Typically what we do is,
I'm sorry, I had one.
yeah,
Just on page 2 of the staff report, Trevor, you talked about the example of the STR, right? That we couldn't find, not being able to find them. One of our concerns is making sure that this isn't potentially a loophole or an avenue. And so I guess a question for you is, could we tie, for example, if we do a reasonable accommodation, could we tie that approval to if the property use changes, triggering a reevaluation of that? Can we put those kind of, for lack of a better word, teeth in the ordinance?
I believe so yes, you can add conditions. A number of conditions are allowed, and ordinance includes some sample conditions, and I believe one of them is.
We can get to it as we go through. I just wanted to,
Yeah.
I had a
So
margin.
so it's granted to an individual resident and shall not run with the land.
And I guess my question on that is to kind of make that a little bit more clear is my suggestion. So if I'm the resident, or if I'm the owner and I get the accommodation, decide to start renting out the property and turn it into an STR, I just don't want to, I want to make sure that's being done for the right reasons. And I know elsewhere you said that the parking, the primary purpose, it would frustrate that goal of the STR ordinance. So that would be a potential reason we could.
If it were
decline it,
already-
right.
But that,
Yeah.
if it were already an STR, that's a good point. What if someone changed it to an STR?
so that actually is maybe something we should mention at our combined meeting later this month, just so that the. Yeah, next week, right? Yeah. So that just the city council can understand, and maybe the STR folks will understand what our issue was. Okay. Any other questions for staff? As we have typically done for this, is we just have been looking at it kind of page by page. I don't think it will take very long, since I think it's almost ready for prime time. So we plow right through it. Okay, starting in packet page number 10.
Thank you for that, by the way, Trevor. Wonderful.
It's so much easier.
I like to have page numbers within the documents, but yes, the whole thing is just a page.
Yeah. Anything on page 1? Okay, page 2. I saw one thing, and I think it's just a typo, but it's the last bolded section, second to the last, which says a new section 1708-269. But I think the actual paragraph is listed below as 08555. Is that correct?
Say that again? Where? So you're
I'm
on
looking.
page 3?
No, on page 2, it's hard. I say 3, make 2.
Oh, yes, yes.
So it's just a typo. I just want to make sure that I wasn't seeing some. Okay. And the other question I had is on that same paragraph, the last phrase, which says including public and common use spaces. When I first read that, I was thinking public spaces, that suddenly doesn't make any sense to me. But I think what we're referring to is public and common spaces within a residential complex.
That's right. So that'd be probably a multi-family development.
That's, just wanted to clarify that. Okay. All right. Anything else on page 2? Okay. Page 3. Page 4. Yeah, question on your comment, DP2. It wasn't clear if you were making a suggestion to have full cost recovery for ordinances, or were you also maybe suggesting that they would not be fully recovered? Wasn't clear.
So one of the things you guys discussed was, that there should be a reasonable accommodation for fees potentially as well. That's not something I have the authority to grant, or even the planning commission, unless it's in the ordinance. So I was just pointing out a couple of ways that other ordinances treat these. One I saw, waived a reason, didn't have fees for reasonable accommodation process. Another waived the fees if it's associated with a discretionary permit. And because a discretionary permit would be full cost recovery, that would really be a wash. It ended up being a wash because the costs for the staff report and the meetings and all that thing would be wrapped into, or the reasonable accommodation process would be wrapped into that. So that would really be a wash. So whether you collect so it's really reducing the amount of deposit, I guess, for that is what.
So it's going to be up to the city council then to decide on fees for the reasonable accommodation.
Unless you included something in the ordinance that gave different.
So just trying, okay. Right. I understand now.
On that note, just something to look into. I guess I came across a document for the city of Oakland because I was looking up that, doing some research too. And they had this is from a disability rights group, but that one of their objections to the city of Oakland's original ordinance was a processing fee, and they list statutes that say that would make it illegal. So I can send that your way so you can, but I don't know.
Most ordinances I looked at did have a fee.
Yeah, and it says processing fee, so I don't know if maybe that's a distinction of processing fee.
Yeah,
something different.
Cities can't make money off of permits, so it has to be related to the cost of a permit, or even your water bills. The city has to show that that's the cost of providing water. So, and that's why our permit fees are we'll just charge what it costs the city. Some communities, take an average and you just pay the average, and some people pay too less. So that might have been what that was as a fee as opposed to but yeah, it'd be interesting to see.
So that still remains somewhat of an open issue. Is that what we're hearing?
I guess, but we don't have authority to do anything about it anyway, so it would be for us to.
Well, you could suggest in the ordinance, for example, that there be no fee, or that no fee be collected if it's a discretionary permit, and then the council will adopt that or not.
Yeah, I guess the question is, do we leave the wording the way it is right now? And I think that's sufficiently vague to give the council a little bit of wiggle room if they want to adjust the fees one way or the other, or combine them. So, agreeable to see it the way it is. Okay. All right. Page 5.
Couple things under E. Second sentence shall be retaining. I think that's a typo. Shall be retained. Probably. The only other thing I had was your question, TP3 clear as written findings and considerations. Findings seem like they would be better. Findings are referenced later in the document if we do a denial or anything like that. So yeah, findings are, help me here, they're a little bit more concrete, right? They're meet these findings and you can have what you want, kind of in essence, right? Versus considerations is a little bit nebulous.
Yeah, so instead of whether the housing will be occupied by an individual, it's that the housing will be occupied. So it's just a slight change of wording, and yeah, that would probably make it more consistent. I think the wording as it is now seems to be more common in ordinances for some reason, but to me, findings are a little clearer.
Fair enough. Okay. Also on page 5. Page 6.
Wondering if the word, that second line. Unlimited spread. One thing about this room, I can't see as well as when I'm at home. The lighting is, there are, for me anyway, is an issue, or I need to bring a light or something. But anyway, getting back to what I was saying. The unlimited to provide, to perform specific city functions. I thought that specific functions, that was a little vague maybe, but I read this last weekend and
Which line were
I
you?
can't hardly read it right now. So, anyway, to add the word city and specific city functions. Kitchen review.
So under decision, he's looking at item A.
Yeah.
So
But it's not a big deal. I just put a question mark in there. Seeing if it needed to be clarified.
Okay. Up on the very top of the page there, again, we're on page 6, item D. I think there might be a word missing. Whether there are reasonable alternatives that would comply with applicable land use or zoning regulations, policies, procedures, or practices that would provide an equivalent level of benefit. Am I reading that right? And then your other comment, TP4, do we need to say anything about OWTS, or is it covered by C and D? I think it's covered.
yeah,
Yeah.
that was my thought.
Okay, anything else on page 6? Okay. Page 7.
Yeah, I have, I guess, some amount of concern surrounding the letter E, second item down. We don't want these things to run with the land, right? But like, how do we ever enforce that? Especially if somebody has an accommodation for a decade or 20 years. Some property.
Yeah, I know of a commercial application where they need a ramp. It would make it better. And they're gonna have it, they want to build it out of concrete. And but, you know, if that's gonna stick with that property. It would make it better. But because there's no other way to really build it. But
Or do we just not worry about it? I guess maybe that's,
because it does make it better.
I mean, potentially we could use some sort of deed restriction. Which we use for, you know, limiting the bedrooms. Based on the septic system. So that can be removed with another document from the city saying that. Say that it needs to go. So that would be. One way to.
that's something that would show up on like a title report or something.
It would, yes. And it's not, I mean, it's not. It's basically it doesn't necessarily make enforcement easier, but it makes sure that the person buying the property knows that that can't stay, for example. And, you know, if the city does have to go to court, then it's, you know, there's this document that the owner acknowledged. And that's.
I like the idea of a deed restriction, I think, just to kind of bring it back around, because I agree, if there's no mechanism to track it or enforce it, kind of. You know, meaningless to have the language in there, that would be a way to do it without having a massive spreadsheet tracking every, you know.
Right. Yeah, across multiple.
But I mean, it's a really good point, it's for a lot of issues with the city, because they try and track stuff.
Right, I mean, I know it's hard for the Trinidad city to track stuff already with property sale.
Yeah.
So. I mean, I don't know how easy is it to put a deed restriction on someone's property.
Pretty easy. Just, and, you know, we have some develop some form language. And then it has to be notarized by the owner. Depending on the type of document it is, and then you just have it.
I guess that would. The only downside of that is that it might increase the fee that. It might just make more generally additional arbitrary barrier to getting the project completed, right? I'm also in favor of deed restriction, but it'd be nice to streamline and make that process as easy as possible for the applicant.
I think there's other natural trigger points with the city.
I mean, I guess the only other thing might be is it would go on whatever file we have for the property, and if they pull a permit to do something else, then we could. That chapter.
If they pull a
If
permit.
they pull a permit.
You know, what I mean, just out of curiosity, what is the process in the city for a sale of a piece of property? Is there a checklist the city goes through naturally already, or I don't know if that might be.
No, I mean, that's been problematic with the testing.
Right, yeah.
So, you know, at this point, most of the realtors know that that's a required disclosure in the city, and they know, but, you know, properties that, you know, are inherited or, you know, sold by owner, we don't necessarily catch those. So it's a little bit of a, yeah. I can look into this issue and see if I can find out how other cities.
I came across Monterey County, it runs with the land in their ordinance.
It does run.
Yeah, which was, they were the only one that had that, yeah, when I was researching, and I did see another one. I couldn't find it again, where there was a component that if the design was such that it was really well integrated into the structure, that it wasn't, you know, just for example, a ramp on the side of the building, that it worked with the character of the building, that it was, those could be allowed to run, kind of, there was an interesting approach. You know, if it's aesthetically and broke with the design and it just simply had a setback issue or something, then that one can run with the land versus making somebody tear it out of them, you know, for an arbitrary reason, kind of. I don't know, it's something to consider.
Yeah, and I think that might be, I mean, it's one, item one gets at that a little bit, modification is physically integrated into the.
Right.
And then I wanted to point out, Aaron, the next sentence after two, any change in use or circumstances that negates the basis for the grant of approval may render the reasonable accommodation null and void and revocable by the city. So I think that covers the change to an STR. So I will research that and see what other cities do.
Okay, what about the language itself? Is readily removed a bit big, or is that sort of a standard term?
Yes. And feasible.
Where feasible.
Yeah, where feasible. Yes, so I mean, that's just something where I probably, you know, work with the building inspector to kind of determine what's feasible. And, you know, I don't know how much, you know, it's not likely that these are going to come up as major issues. So it's kind of, we can probably cross that bridge when we come to it. You know, if someone really wants to be stubborn about something, have to look into options or amending something, but it's not likely to be a major issue. I think that the kinds of reasonable accommodations that come up are going to be fairly either that or they're going to have to.
Yeah. I don't know that I'm in favor of a deed restriction, sort of moving us back to the conversation. I mean, I think that, as Chris pointed out, it's just an additional barrier to the applicant. I think some of this may just be able to be enforced by, or like the neighborhood. It's like your neighbor's got one of these things, and you see them never using it. You're aware.
So yeah, so this would be the kind of thing that, I mean, the city does have a nuisance abating ordinance. So this would be in their file, and so if someone complained or a city staff person noticed that and then change, the property is sold, they write a letter and say, okay, you have to remove this now, and someone refuses to, I think, you know, we would have the documentation in the file that it was only a temporary approval, and the city could use nuisance abatement. That is an option.
Seems fine.
Anything else on page 7? I just have one comment on page 7. The appeal paragraph 1758-070. Trevor, this goes back way back, but in my ordinance document, we were proposing an amendment to this paragraph. And the paragraph was to had something to do with there shall be no fee for filing an appeal. And that is still in the current ordinance. What were we ever going to do anything with that? This goes back to 2012.
Something about that, actually.
Believe it or not.
No, and that's a difficult. I've struggled with that. You know, seen appeals in various jurisdictions. Various jurisdictions treat them differently. Sometimes it's the original applicant's responsibility. Sometimes it's the applicant. In the coastal zone, it's a little more complicated because if there is an appeal fee, Now, this is when there's a coastal development permit involved, so I guess it wouldn't apply to just an administrative reasonable accommodation. But in the case of a coastal development permit, if there is an appeal fee, they can appeal, someone can appeal directly to the coastal commission and bypass the citizens. So that's one reason not to do a fee. The planning commission did adopt a fee or recommend a fee, and I believe the city council did adopt some sort of fees structure for appeals. And when that went to the coastal commission, they said, well, then you have to, your whole appeal section needs to be amended. And then that brings in the noticing requirements. So then your whole noticing requirement section needs to also be amended. So it was sort of this wormhole. So we did not, that amendment was not certified by the coastal commission.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify and make sure. Okay, thank you. Anything else on page 7?
So that might be one reason to, so currently it's written, if a neighbor got wind or someone got wind of this reasonable accommodation and it was approved and they didn't like it for some reason, they could appeal to the planning commission. So staff decisions are appealable first to the planning commission. And then they wouldn't have to pay a fee and could go through this whole rigmarole through the planning commission and city council. So maybe that's a good reason to have it only if it's an adverse decision. So if I say no to a reasonable accommodation request, then the person who's requesting can appeal it, and there's no fee for that. That might be reason to have that language.
Okay, so are you recommending that we change the language here? Because right now, the way this is written is that we just revert back to 17.72.100, where there's no fee.
Again, I don't think it's, I don't think it be an issue, but someone wants to be vindictive for some reason, and you never know, something like that could happen. But on the other hand, I'm making these decisions and it's not the planning commission and it's not at a public hearing. And so maybe either way, my decision should be appealed. I'm fine either way.
The issue is not whether or not it can be appealed, it's whether or not then the city could charge for the process of the appeal.
So you could add a fee for an appeal here because it's not a coastal development.
Yeah, but unfortunately, since the way it's written right now, we reference that 1758, and that covers all the ordinances in all zones.
Yes.
So we would have.
You could say, unless appealed in compliance with section blah blah, notwithstanding section 1770-100, there shall be a fee. You can either put the fee in here or set by resolution of the city council. You could add a fee here in this stuff.
Thoughts on that?
I don't think we should have a fee personally.
I guess I'm wondering why this would be any different than any other appeal process. The appeal process is laid out in 1772-100. Why complicate the matter further?
Because we have had a couple of appeals that have cost the city. Not that that's going to happen very often, or it's not likely to happen. But that's the.
Under our current appeal process, would those have been any different?
No.
I guess I'm just curious, why would we pick this out of anything to kind of make the stand on? I guess it's kind of, this is a strange spot where the goal is to remove barriers to, and I know this isn't really the applicant necessarily, but.
No, it would probably make more sense to revisit the issue when you revisit section 1772.
Yeah, my only concern was that it was in the back of my mind that we had changed that ordinance, and then when I looked at it, I didn't see it. I'm fine with that. If everybody agrees, we'll have to look at that when we look at the as it is in 1772 100. Okay. Anything else on page 7? Page 8. Okay. While it wasn't addressed in the staff report, I assume that the next 2 new documents were for reference only. Or did you want to go through those?
Oh, yeah, so this is the whole thing is that HCE guidance. So that whole 24 pages, and it includes a couple of sample forms. And the city is supposed to have this notice that.
Right.
And plus reasonable accommodations. So those are just attachments to that piece.
Not to, does anyone want to have, do you have any questions or would like to raise any issues or anything in those 2 documents?
I just thought it was a useful document. I would have provided you with it at the beginning of the process if I had it.
Thank you.
There's a question about, in a couple of places in the documents, it mentions that people can withhold kind of information about their disability. Does that burden fall on you with the application process to make sure whatever gets noticed and presented publicly? Do they tick a box saying, I want this information? This is, I just want to make sure that's on the radar to be compliant with.
Yeah, I think it would probably be up to the applicant, because I don't think there's there's not necessarily a legal requirement on me. But if they want certain things to be kept confidential, they should mark that, and the city should have a process for doing that.
Yeah, and again, I admit I did not look at these forms as closely as maybe I should have, but one thing that was a little bothersome to follow from what you said, Aaron, was I would assume that as soon as these documents are presented to the city, then they become public documents subject to public requests for information, FOIA.
Yes,
And so
there are exceptions.
well, that's what I'm trying to understand that, or do we have to have something very specific saying that this information is going to be in the public domain and therefore, be sure you know what you want to put on the form?
Yeah, or maybe the application form that says any medical information you want to keep confidential needs to be identified as such, so that they.
And right now that's not in here.
No, just that section that I added that says, to the extent permitted by law, any information identified by an applicant as confidential shall be retained in a manner so as to respect the privacy rights.
Yeah, I think we're covered there. What I was referring to was the application paperwork.
So yeah, we should probably include a note on the application. It says.
Right.
You can mark what you want confidential to the extent allowed by law. So anything that's not discoverable or whatever under the FOIA.
And it does say that you do not need to tell us the name or extent of your disability. So, I mean, it's somewhat covered, but you get a little nervous about private information like that.
Yeah. Yeah, all they have to say is it makes it difficult for me to do.
I understand. Okay, any other comments, questions on the ordinance? Okay, at this point, then I'll turn it over for public comment. And seeing none or hearing none, bring it back to the commission. So it looks like, with the exception of probably 2 or 3 fairly minor items. This is probably ready for submittal to the city council.
Yeah, I think so. Just, I guess, how do you feel about adding those? Sort of supplemental guidance for findings F and E.
What packet page, Trevor? Help me.
So it's on packet page 9. Is the sample language, and that would be added under findings, so packet page 14, although F and G, so what is the requested accommodation will impose an undue financial burden? And no, sorry, F and so G is the would it impede or require fundamental alteration in a city program, policy, or law? So that's been kind of an issue of discussion. And so the first section, italics, provides some supplemental guidance for that. I think those A, B, and C would be useful to add under finding G. Then, okay, actually C, the second italics would actually be actually for finding B. So whether the requested accommodation is reasonable and necessary to make the housing available to them. That one I think is less important.
So you're saying that the on page 9, item C, you don't think we need to do? You think you're?
I think that's less important.
Okay.
But I think it still could be useful.
Yeah, I don't have any problem with that. And then item 2 is what you would like to add as item.
They'd be
Items on
under G.
G. Okay. Okay. All right. Any comments on that?
Well, I guess your letter C there is maybe a little repetitive with what's already written in G, but the other two, A and B, I mean, I understand. I think it's my understanding you ask for these because it will give you more guidance. Is that your intention? Just to make it more clear when you're trying to decide administratively.
Yeah, so you're saying little c under 2 is kind of repetitive.
Yeah, I think based on what's listed, already listed in G. You know, general plan, city programs, policies.
Yeah.
But I support A and B going under there.
It's a little bit more specific, but not a lot.
I guess, are you hoping, Trevor, to get out of this kind of just like almost a checklist of the kind of like reminders? Because I feel like also, I mean, I hear your desire for the detail, but also it says clearly, I mean, the general plan, I mean, every document that is applicable, you know what I mean? So anything in our ordinances, zoning, general plan can be referenced already. But
I could certainly, as part of my own process, use these. They don't have to be in the ordinance for me to use them. And then I could add to it, and then it could be more flexible, I guess. So that might be one advantage of not.
The whole concept is to be reasonable.
So when this will be presented to the city council, they could also weigh in on this as well.
Yeah, so I think, yeah, so for the city council, if you want me to, I can present, some of the various options and questions you guys have looked at. So
I think personally, I think the language, the way it is fine, but then if there is additional clarity that either you feel or the city council feels is necessary, then that's also fine as far as I'm concerned.
There's including but not limited to, those great words are in section G already, right?
Okay, let's see, we brought it back to the, I'm just trying to figure out where in that process. So we brought it back to the commission for any other comments. Do you want us to make a motion?
I think, if you are comfortable with me making the minor changes that we've discussed tonight and then making a motion and sending it right to the city council, that would be fine. Or if you want to see it one more time,
What's the pleasure of the commission?
Can you tell us explicitly what those minor changes are? Can we catalog those really quickly?
So I'm going to fix the typo in the second, a new section 1708-269. It's what I added. And I'll just, as a reminder, an issue has come up with the definitions and how we're going to reference these for LCP. And that's, we might use the zoning ordinance amendment you guys passed the last year that had just all those state housing law updates, definitions for residential uses and things allowed in residences. We might use that to certify the city's codification of its own. So the Coastal Commission uses different section numbers than the city does, and the definitions don't have section numbers in the certified version, so they're difficult to reference and add in an amendment. So like the STR ordinance has its own definitions in that section, but really those definitions should be part of the entire zoning ordinance. We could do that with this ordinance, but again, we need to get this fixed, because if we're doing a bunch of amendments, we don't want definitions here and there throughout the zoning ordinance. We want them in. So this might have to change depending on how we have to get this certain. So just the section numbers. Language isn't going to change. I'm going to change the wording of section 1758.050 on packet page 14 to findings. Whether the housing will be occupied by an individual, it's that the housing will be occupied by an
Trevor, up at the top under section E, just that typo, retaining to retain.
yes. So yeah, so in E that's added in red and underline that to retain. Also a typo at the top of page 15. D, there's another that would after the red addition.
I guess that is the right word. Is it grammatically correct, or should it be which word? I always forget. I'll let you figure that out. I don't remember.
Yeah, I think it's got to be that. Yeah, I think that works fine. I don't know if there was really a consensus under A. I was going to look at that language and think about it a little bit more, whether it needs city in there instead of specific. we'll look at that. We're not gonna add deed restriction language and we're not gonna add fees, so no changes to those sections, so that was it.
It's just whether or not we want to see it again with those changes, or if we feel comfortable enough to get it to the city council. Let them chew on it a little bit.
I motion to move it forward.
I'm comfortable with those changes now that we.
Okay, sounds like we have a consensus. Do I hear a motion?
A motion to move it forward as per changes that Trevor.
Okay.
To the city council.
Second?
Second.
Any further discussion? Great. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it. Moving on. Okay. Next item on our agenda is the general plan zoning update for community design. The discussion decision on an updated draft of the community design element and design criteria. Again, this was continued from our December 2022 meeting. Sure, you have a report for us?
Sure, so just again made the fairly minor changes from the last meeting to both the community design elements and the design review regulations. The biggest change was to design element policy CD 1.3, where I made them mirror the design criteria. That's what we're using, right? And then I revised the terminology. So to be consistent, so the general plan includes policies and programs. And if those have additional guidance within them, I've called them guidance or guidelines. And the new regulations are design review criteria. That's the current terminology. I've gone through and made everything consistent, I think. And then the planning commission wanted some additional public outreach for this. We did do, I forgot to check and see what else might have gotten done while I was on vacation last week, but it was announced at the city council meeting as part of the staff report, I believe. And we did include it, Gabe did include it in the email newsletter that went out with the meeting announcement. So at least that got done. Let's see. And I put them on the city's website as well, separate from the packet, so people can look at them on their agenda.
Thank you. Appreciate the extra effort to get it out there. Any general comments or questions, considerations for the commission, from the commission?
Just, I appreciate all the language consistency, particularly with regard to criteria. I think that makes a lot more sense for me.
Okay, and as is customary for this kinds of thing, we'll just walk through it. So page by page. So we'll start with page 1. Any comments or questions on page 1? Page 2. Page 3. Just on a roll.
I just had a question on page 3, Trevor, on your TP2, you say CD 1.1 and 1.2 equals that. It's 2.1 and 2.2, right? I just want to make sure I was. Page 4, sorry, thank you.
Oh, yeah.
And then I guess, was there a
Yes.
reason, is that just like a reference, a tracking thing for yourself that, or is that something you wanted to?
Yes, I think those have come up as discussion points before, and so I wanted to note that, you know, if someone wanted to do some language tweaking on those, just noting that those are direct from the Coastal Act. Although overall, I will say. One of my questions because they have definitely been pushing the city to directly include all the coastal act policies in the general plan. I don't see that in other LCPs, so I'm gonna question whether that's really necessary or, what's the point of having a local LCP if it's just coastal act? So that's just an aside. Yes, so that's a note in case we want to discuss that language that is.
And then on your comment, TP, you're right, Tom, it's hard to see. TP1. Did we clarify that or resolve that?
I think so. I think it showed up somewhere else, and that's where we.
It's in design review.
Okay.
I think is where I saw it.
Oh, yeah.
But I just wanted to include a reminder in case I didn't address it.
Got it. Okay. Anything else on page 4? Page 5?
Sorry, page 4. I know the Trevor and I have talked about this a little bit before, but the language about within residential and commercial structures, there are often, view sheds which exist outside of the living space. Residents, that's something that could be incorporated here. That's interesting incorporating that there. Ideas from Bob.
Yes, I think so. I think the distinction has been that the current general plan certified or adopted originally by the city in 76, certified by the. So the city has protected private views from inside residences since 1970. So what our views and vegetation is based on. Views are obviously a contentious issue in Trinidad. And so, yes, I think it, does the city want to expand those protections to, outdoor viewing points? I think within might be broad enough to include, an attached deck or something like that, balcony. But yeah, I think that it is a point of discussion.
I sort of think that it within does capture that. It doesn't read inside.
I think that's why we used that language, if I recall, is because it's.
But I do understand what you're saying.
I don't have a recommendation one way or the other. Just be mindful of, expanding view protections or reducing view protection.
We do get at it a little bit in C 3.2. New development shall be cited designed to minimize impacts on views from, and then we list there.
Well, but those are all outside, right?
Those are public views, I guess.
Yeah, just to be clear, I was referring to like patios and balconies and spaces that are technically inside the residence, but are still employees.
What if we changed structures to parcels, properties? That. I don't know. That create in the way of a new issue.
Yeah, I think you want to be careful of, do you want to deal with, so someone can walk to some corner of their lot and see something, and be careful of that. But, I think outdoor living areas are good.
But again, that is a structure.
It is a structure, yeah.
And so one could say that when we say from key viewing points within residential and commercial structures.
If it's attached, yeah.
It's. In my mind, we could say it's included.
Yeah, I also think the key viewing points or the key viewing sort of allows some discretion for the structure owner
Yeah.
to determine what is key, I guess.
Are we okay with that?
So just to clarify, nobody feels like that terminology excludes outdoor space as of this point.
I think it includes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So nobody feels like it makes sense.
Well, I actually, I'm not seeing this CD 2.3 as referring to outside. I mean, I'm having trouble with the word within defining something outside. Within. I mean, within a structure is from within my home. I'm trying to, put myself on my parcel, and if I'm concerned about a view from outside, somebody building something on the adjacent, but again, we have our ordinance that protects that. But that only protects it from within structures, not from outside, and so that's kind of.
I mean, you could say,
I mean, does the city protect view shed from outside of their structure?
not currently.
No, I mean, so that would be a big change. Right, I mean, right now,
Yeah, but we're not, I guess my goal wouldn't be to protect views from some random corner of your yard, right? But from sort of an integrated sort of, showpiece balcony, for example, like my own.
right. To me, that's part of your structure though. Okay. Yes,
Yeah, to me, that's a key viewing point.
yeah.
I mean, you could just say, from key viewing points from residential and commercial structures.
Say that again.
So remove
From
within.
key viewing points.
From residential and commercial structures.
Key viewing points of residential and commercial structures, you're saying strike within to of, because that would include then a deck or a balcony or.
Yeah. Key viewing points of, from. You want to protect views of houses, but
I'd like from. I guess of sort of suggests that it's a viewing point of the structure rather than from the structure, right? Is that what you're?
key public viewing points.
Well, we're prohibiting structures. So on and so forth from blocking. From key viewing points of a structure. I mean, I get that fine.
Sure.
It's kind of like we're using structure two different ways in the same sentence, which is awesome for clarity. Is it the structure that is prohibiting the view, or the structure I'm seeing the view from, or of, or within?
Well, okay, so it could be prohibit development. Instead of structures.
On reading it again, I think of instead of from of structures at the end would work okay.
Same word could mean so many things.
Okay, with that change.
Change to of.
I should have spoke up on page 3. I did have that thing. Could we go back one?
Yeah, let's just see if we're all on the same page with this little issue here.
This might be my own naivete, right? But a structure includes basically any improvements on a parcel. Is that?
I think development would actually be a better word there.
With it or viewing points of residential and commercial developments.
No, I mean prohibit development from.
The top. The entry.
Oh, sorry, I was referring to that last structures.
Yeah.
Is
Are you suggesting, Trevor, then prohibit development, including fences, so on, and then key viewing points of? Is that where we are now with the,
That's where I'm at.
okay, I think that's where I am.
From key viewing points of residential. Okay, so I'm gonna change the first structures development and the theme to up.
Satisfied.
Okay, thumbs up. All right, okay. Tom, you wanted to go back?
Yeah, could we real quick to CD 1.3?
Yeah, I would, you know, those I kind of threw those in there, so I would like you guys to look at A through N there, and does that encompass what we're trying to do with each of those sets of criteria?
To me, C is in conflict with B and D, and it's not even needed.
Well, C is, we have a whole section on grading. So we need something for C.
That doesn't include site planning. And what's the? For all I can do.
So what you're trying to do is mirror the actual criteria.
Yeah,
I see, okay.
kind of try and encapsulate what those sets of criteria are trying to accomplish. So that then these criteria are implementing these guidelines.
Anything else on 4? Okay, 5.
Couple thoughts on here. One, under CD 3.1B, trying to understand existing infrastructure systems, what that term is trying to capture. Wasn't able to really, I mean, is that plumbing? Is that wiring? Is that,
I think it's more roadways, driveways. We did have a discussion about this at one point. Does anybody?
quickly, I don't.
Because it's kind of, it's somewhat strange language. Yeah, you know, I think, you know, so instead of having your garage, so if the street's up here and your lot slopes down, instead of having your garage at the bottom and having a driveway, that's probably the kind, so you're integrating it with the existing roadways and, you know, where do the utilities and water lines come in so that you're not, you know, disturbing things more than you have to. Is it necessary? I mean, you sort of already have minimized disturbance and grading, and you have minimized length of driveways in other places.
I think what's maybe getting us kind of off center here is the word systems. I think you just said integrating site design with existing infrastructure of the surrounding area is better for me, at least. I mean, I agree, infrastructure systems is difficult to define without really onion it.
I guess to your point, Trevor, I mean, we have, you know, utilized basically good site planning. Is this necessarily, do we have to be specific here again, or could we get by without this and it's kind of addressed in that, you know, previous?
Yeah, I mean, those guidelines are probably covered by the criteria already. Doesn't necessarily hurt to have. As long as they don't conflict.
Right.
And I guess now that I'm looking at this, at a higher level, A through D are kind of an attempt to add some specificity or examples to 3.1, but is it really necessary to do that there? We don't.
They're already covered, yeah.
I guess could we strike all 4 of those because they're elsewhere in the document? I'm fine with that.
Objections.
Let me make sure so we're striking the subparagraphs A through D. Okay, and just for architectural features and styles that are compatible with the community. So this was an attempt to look at item D, right? D and D.
The design.
Yeah.
criteria.
Yeah, yes.
I think that that policy predated these design criteria. So we had that policy in there before we had these design criteria. And that's one of the things why I wanted to do the design criteria, because we were getting very specific in these policies. And so I wanted to reduce the specificity in the general plan policies and leave it in the criteria. So removing A through D would be consistent with that endeavor, as long as it's covered.
And right now it is, right?
Yeah, so it's, I mean, a lot of it's covered in C. Clustering structures may not be,
As in C3.
is it?
Yeah.
But yeah, okay, yeah. So yeah, I think, yeah. And probably D is covered by B. Not specifically.
All right, so let me make sure I understand what we're doing then. Are we still in agreement? We're going to strike A through D on page 5?
I like that.
So the only thing that's not specifically included in the criteria is integrating site design with existing infrastructure. Do we need that in the site planning?
I mean, I feel like we get to that. We already say underground utilities where applicable, and good grading practices and site design principles are going to kind of capture marrying with a street, marrying with,
I think so too.
not to mention the opportunities within the city limits currently. We need to think beyond that, but currently there's not a whole lot of room. Sure. Right.
Okay.
I had another one on 3.2, CD 3.2, to add views from trails, beaches, ocean, and public streets. I feel like that's a consistent thing we're trying to do elsewhere in the document, or was I consistently bring it up? Want to see what people thought about adding that.
Yeah.
Sounds
like
good.
that.
I'd second that.
And public streets. Is that what you're saying? Okay. Yeah, I'm assuming that if I don't hear an objection, that there is at least some sort of concurrence if we're moving on. So
That's fair.
scream or yell or something if you don't agree. Anything else on page 5?
Is there something, I'm sorry, is there something that's more inclusive than public streets? Like, are there any areas in town which aren't trails or public streets? From which
You could do streets, trails, beaches, ocean, and other public viewing locations.
Sure.
Okay. Right. Anything else on page 5? Page 6.
I just had a general question under signs. To reference anything here right now about temporary political signs, that kind of stuff. Just knowing that's coming in 2 years.
So we do have,
I think we've got that
it's
covered.
covered under 4.5, I think, and then the use of temporary portable signs.
Okay.
And I think there's even. Isn't there some dimensional information too that has to be complied with?
Yeah, there is actually in the zoning ordinance, there's some limitations on political signs already.
As
Right.
I recall, though, with the last election cycle, didn't the city discover that there was perhaps not the best language in there, the most clear? Not that we're gonna solve that right now, but I felt like there was concerns raised and it was, signs could be allowed, couldn't be allowed, take them down, don't take them down.
Yeah, I think it's a size issue.
Anyway, I mean, again, that's more the sign ordinance than this. I just was curious if we,
Right.
Okay.
Anything else on 6, page 6?
For CD4. One of my pet peeves is that like highway signs have become increasingly more reflective, and I'm not sure that this would ever be an applicable situation, but you can imagine like a commercial enterprise putting up a sign that's just sort of excessively reflective and kind of disruptive. I don't know. What would this be? Like sign should be.
So could we add that to CD 4.5?
Oh, yes, sorry, that's what I was specifically.
Yes, I think you,
Flashing or excessively reflective.
Excessively reflective, yeah.
I don't know that I would ever actually get.
I guess, so here's a question. I mean, what about public safety signs?
Those are excluded, right? Exceptions.
Is there?
Exceptions may be
Maybe
considered
considered
not-
for purposes. Okay, yeah, I think that covers it. I think the city's putting some flashing.
Anything else on 6? 7? There was just a little typo there in CD-6.3. Third sentence. Just add an LY, I think. On health. Anything else on 7? Page 8. Okay, moving on to page 1 of the draft design review criteria and procedures. Anything on page 1?
Regarding the story poles, I'm thrilled that we're putting that in here. I had a suggestion under A, in addition to building footprint, building bulk, or roof elevation. I wanted to add in, kind of like you were asking, Trevor, but or grading, landscaping that has potential to impact public-private view sheds. In your comment, TP4 is, do we want to add that in? And I do. I think that's important.
Yes, okay.
And a story pole indicating what that might look like, the extent of grading. I'm imagining, I don't know, a foundation, a house pad or something for a lot to develop that needs to be bulked up, and all I see is the story poles for the extent of the building, but I didn't realize there was going to also be our goal is to minimize grading. I don't know, just if there's the potential that it's going to impact the view. There's a few lots in town still that when they do get asked to be developed are going to be a real challenge for the planning commission.
Yeah.
Because you can't do anything there without impacting the view.
If there was a large fill slope or something.
Yeah. That kind of a thing. Just basically, I mean,
Yeah.
not say that any grading requires it, but if you feel there's potential to impact view issues that, let's get a story pull for that.
Well, currently grading that changes the elevation by more than 2 feet, I think it is required.
Okay.
So, I mean,
But not story pulls though still.
not story.
That's this is giving people a chance to see what it might look like.
Yes.
Uh,
So. One question would be for anything that requires design review, you want story pools, can you think of anything where story pools wouldn't be required?
Well, if.
I mean, maybe if something's under a certain height. Right now, I think it's structures and landscape over 3 feet.
But we have the, there is you can build up to a certain height of a certain size house, for example.
Yes, but not in any configuration. Yet. So the current criteria
Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay.
guarantee you a minimum of 15 feet in height and 1,500 square feet, but that doesn't mean, but maybe you're required to have your roof line this way instead of this way.
Yeah.
I mean, it could just be installation of story pools shall be required. I mean, it could be or design review. There's an exception, right? Zoning administrator may waive or modify these requirements. So maybe it should just be for any design review. If it's a 2-foot retaining wall, I can waive the requirement.
That works.
Yeah, if it's not going to impact a view shed.
It's obviously not gonna be an issue.
I mean,
The point being though, then, is that there has to be a requirement that story poles are required for all design review.
All improvements, okay, so all development or improvements requiring design review.
So is that another?
So instead of installation of story poles shall be required for improvements that require design. Development.
and that would.
Development, I like that.
And that would encapsulate this, the specific building footprint, bulk, roof elevation, those things you feel? Okay. As well as grading, landscaping. The other thing with regards to vegetation, some language or just an understanding that a story pole for vegetation would need to maximum growth or maximum maintained, not the palm tree when it's cute and little before it,
Yeah, so maybe add something like that to C. Maximum vegetation growth to C.
Well, okay, so there, that in my mind becomes problematic because, I mean, if you put in a cypress tree or something, I don't know, I picked a tree. And you're not gonna put a story pole up 100 feet. But we would be covered under the views of vegetation ordinance if that tree began to impact a view, correct?
Yeah, and trees are difficult. I mean, it's Diane, for example, always advocated for a height limit. And I argued against that because you can have large trees that you can see under and through that add to it. Yeah, how would you?
The city of Los Gatos has a nice policy and how they do their views of vegetation. One of the things they offer is the exceptions like this. They talk about simulations, visual simulations where, for the Vanderbilt project, there were kind of like blocks of outlines, like this is what it looks like from my residence, right? To see. Anyway, it offers kind of a really nice layout. It's lengthy, longer than it seems like it should be. It's more than a page, but it really kind of outlines a lot of options. I don't know if that's worth you taking a peek at that.
Yeah.
The other thing I saw looking at a bunch of story polls guidelines is the use of netting as opposed to a string between the standard 18-inch netting, and I really like that idea. And this one has examples of what that looks like, so you can see the rake, the roof line, the ridge line, those types of things, and really get a sense for the outline. You don't have to misconnect the dots in your own brain, so to speak.
Would you support like digital renderings in lieu of story polls?
I'm not opposed to that. I have concerns over that because there are obvious unintentional trickery manipulations that could be happening with forced perspective on that. So to
Or
me,
things change as you walk by it.
right. So to me, it's a little bit cleaner if there's an actual structure with an outline, and then I kind of have to shade it in my head, or could go take a picture and shade it in. That the Los Gatos one does that, and then they have a whole bunch of criteria about certifications, and it really seems kind of burdensome to the applicant, but possibly necessary. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think the netting is maybe a little too burdensome to the applicant. In my opinion. That sounds like a specialty. I mean, I think story polls are supposed to be rather crude and simple, but accurate, of course. And just like, okay, now you're going to put up these story polls, and then you have to go buy 18-inch web netting to cover your whole.
No, it's not to cover the whole thing. It's literally from point to point, like from the end of one pole to the end of one pole. You just have a strip running across. I don't know if you remember in the Vanderbilt project, they had strings.
Flip your.
Yeah, it's something as simple as that. Anton, if you can get that on the camera there a little bit. No, I'm not suggesting a wall of netting, basically building.
That's what I'm
God, absolutely, that'd be better. But this is just kind of to really help connect the dots
on the exterior.
Yeah, just to really, I don't know, I saw that and liked it, and I've seen it in other areas driving around down the Bay Area.
It could even be, more like flagging tape kind of stuff.
Sure.
That's what I
Thicker than.
like. High vis, ink flag seems like it should be really
Something
easy.
more than
I
a
think it should be
string.
really easy to see. I
Yeah.
agree with that. I don't know. The netting just seems like, I guess, like sort of just like something you let's throw away.
Absolutely. No, I don't
And
disagree
like,
with that.
obviously, flagging is the same. It's just
Yeah.
less stuff.
So, right now, we just are requiring bright colored tape or string in such a manner as to outline the maximum extent. Get rid of scan. That's what I'm wondering, is what suggestions are we saying for changing language here?
Like at high points.
Well, I think that's covered in C. I do agree.
Is there an instance where string is enough?
Well, that's going to be your discretion, whether or not we need it at all.
We could add to clearly outline.
I guess my feeling is the webbing is maybe a little overkill. But at the same time, it's got that I've seen some pretty bad story polls that don't depict what you're going to see. So I guess we have to figure out what makes the most sense.
I like the orange string. Orange. It's typical in construction, you use orange string for laying out sites, everybody's got.
It's high vis, basically. I mean, bright color says that already.
So Trevor, you had suggested to add clearly right before outline, to clearly outline the maximum extent. I think that gives us enough wiggle room. I mean, that would sound okay with me.
And, you know, I think someone can come to the meeting and say it wasn't clear in the planning commission.
We put language in, it is suggested to use. I mean, it's not required. I mean, the story polls are required, but we suggest that you connect with something to make it. I don't know, my experience with string is that can be difficult. The string sags. Everything can sag, obviously, but I don't know. I just feel like string is woefully inadequate sometimes for projects and story polls.
You can also argue that if the string is sagging, then it's not successfully outlining the maximum extent, right? So part of that is ensuring that the string is taut. That's the only way you can actually.
Yeah. Just thoughts?
Yeah.
I'd be happy moving on if I just don't like string. The string is too thin a line. I just feel like there's other very thin things that are competing with my eyes when I'm looking at something. The power lines, they're still on some street. I don't know. I just feel like string is inadequate and I just would like to, but.
No, it makes a lot of sense. In fact, most strings that I've seen will then have ribbons tied to it to make it more. I'm not exactly sure how we.
Not the string with
Angry ribbons.
well, the string with like flagging, plastic flagging every
Interval.
at intervals no less than.
Well, I think it might be worth adding or other material, or there's other things besides tape. And I think, I don't know that we have to specify an interval. As long as it's clearly and accurately.
I think that's the key. Those clearly and accurately. Yeah.
So what are we proposing
So
now?
we're at, story poles shall be connected by bright colored tape or string with flagging or other material in such a manner as to clearly and accurately outline the maximum.
Okay. Okay. Anything else on 2?
Can we go back to 1 for a second?
Sure.
Page 1. Page 1, back at page 54. At the very bottom, letter B. Can't remember what Chris mentioned in the public comment. Did you ask for 10 days or did you ask for 14 days?
I think that 10 is a bit short, right? Because if the public is submitting their comments or the packets, you have the timing right, but the packet is.
It was Friday, so the packets.
It'd be nice to have, nice to consider like the date of the assembly of the packet as well.
How far out do you notify the?
2 weeks. 10 more.
I just see language here, shall be installed prior to the neighborhood notification process and shall remain in place until the project has been acted upon until the appeal.
Or just have it be 10 working days, the same as the notice.
It would be helpful if I get a notice and I know I can go, okay, go look at it. And that seems like a reasonable expectation.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, and by 14 days should do that, because I mail them out on 14 days, so you're not gonna get them until the day after that, so.
So we're adding working.
Do you want 14 days or do you want 10 working days? The notice is 10 working days current.
Sure.
Okay, we were on page 2. Anything else on page 2? Page 3. I initially thought I'm looking at under A cultural resources, paragraph 2. And my initial comment was going to be, we don't know the final location of the Memorial Lighthouse, but then I think we're covered when we say within 100 feet of the lots on which identified historical resources are located. So I think that's all right, although I heard the most recent suggestion was putting the lighthouse in the Saunders Park. So I think we're covered there because of the way in which it identifies it within 100 feet of the lots on which the identified historical resources. So that's going to be a moving target.
I mean, does it need to be 100 feet of the lot? I mean, because the harbor lots are huge. So that's like 500 radius potentially. Saunders Park also is another lot that's huge. Or is it just within 100?
Yeah, I was also curious, and not saying one, how it would affect with the new land acquisition. That change that could potentially be happening. Be some kind of word.
We talked about the federal trust. Yeah, I was wondering what authority oversight does this body have once the land's in federal trust? If it is approved into federal trust, do we still have?
So wait, so are you talking about the harbor and the trust, or are you
Yes.
talking about the Truray?
The harbor specifically right now, I'm just
Okay.
curious, because that's where the lighthouse is slated to go based off what we approved, right? The
Yes,
hearing.
so, but if you said within 100 feet of the lot, that might include city property.
Side point, once the land is in, assuming it gets to federal trust, it's out of our,
That's right, it's actually not even in the city.
Okay.
Okay, so I think we're not making any changes there. Is that right? Leaving it the way it is.
under.
Do you want it as lots, or do you want it just?
Well, I guess from what you just said, particularly with land going into trust or the harbor area going into trust, 100 feet means that we wouldn't have any control over it. So, but the lot, 100 feet from the lot, we would, correct? Am I reasoning that
Yes.
right?
I guess the question is, would development that far away from it?
I don't, yeah. Where did this wording come from? Is
It's
this,
a current design criteria.
that's right, okay, all right. So we're not changing anything at this point.
No, I just took that first sentence out.
I saw that, yeah.
Because it's not necessary, it's not part of the regulation.
Is there anything in the Shire management plan that we would be going against by changing it? Something that I don't know that document well enough. I've read it, but certainly not an expert on it. I just don't know if we switch it here, are we contradicting something that's in there.
I don't think so.
Okay.
Plan to leave it alone. Okay. Anything else on 3?
Something I think that Tristan has been sensitive to in the past, distinguishing natural from native. I guess we're looking under B1. I guess I'm just arguing
There was a,
that native vegetation has higher inherent worth than just natural vegetation.
Yes, but I think you also want to minimize disturbance of all vegetation. In terms of the grading and erosion. That's important. And, but I mean, yes, I think, yes, native habitat has a higher importance, but other vegetation also provides.
That's a good point. I mean, we had an opportunity for someone to like clear my neighbor's lot that's covered in Tony aster, weedy heat, the whole thing. I mean, even though it's natural, that's beneficial to remove all that. And then if we're in design review, we can encourage them to replant it to natives instead of just like leaving the back half alone.
No, I see what you're saying, but I also don't think we want, I mean, in that situation, we really want someone to scrape an entire lot or do that a little bit more judiciously.
Well, that was maybe a little bit some dramatic terminology on my part, but I guess, I mean, in my mind, like that lot's probably already been scraped out before, and that's why all those things are there. So they can just do it again and then plant natives instead.
well, you know, as a reminder, one of our future agenda items is a vegetation management ordinance.
Yeah.
So
We'll have that public hearing for that, I'm sure. It's one member.
that might be covered there.
Is, the design review criteria, and I think that whether you can make that finding is this language gives you wiggle room to use the specific circumstances of the case.
But then,
You don't want to hem yourself in
Sure.
too much.
Yes. Yeah.
but then we also then somewhere in here, we discussed that as part of the design review and landscaping, right? That shall use native.
Yeah, that's back in the,
Yes.
Yeah, I'm trying to
Which-
find that.
could though be on an existing lot, right? If somebody's resetting their landscaping, we are requiring them to use native. That's back on, I just was thinking that as well.
Where is that?
Packet page 52, CD 6.1, new landscaping shall utilize native drought tolerant non-invasive.
It's actually 60.
Was it on 62 as well?
Could be.
What is on the page?
I don't.
Yeah, it's on both.
I'll say it on 62 though.
So then that actually might be something that's missing from those criteria.
Yes.
Although we are going to have a water efficient landscape ordinance. I think that is actually, that is something that's in from the.
Yes. Okay,
I had one more thing on 3. If we're there. If we're done with it, when we're done with that. Just again, under B6, the very last line, adding in language about streets. Because we list minimize visual impact from the site planning, beaches, public trails, open spaces, and streets.
Sorry, I was still
That's
finishing
all right.
up my note on landscaping, sorry.
On page 3, Trevor. B6, the very last sentence on the page.
Okay,
Just adding in language there again, incorporating streets, or whatever the verbiage we did for the.
Yeah.
For that report.
Other viewing locations.
Yes.
anything else on 3? Number 4? Five?
I had a question on E1A on page 5. After the word community. I wanted to suggest striking that and ending the sentence there. I feel like unless they're designed in such as somebody can always come to us and ask for exception, right? And I feel like we say there's a hard limit, or we're really encouraging this limit on the size, and we say, but if you can do it nicely, then maybe we'll say yes. I feel like it's a very mixed message and mixed direction from us.
So you're striking everything beyond
The word community. It's the suggestion, yeah. I mean, people can still come to us, right, Trevor, and ask for an exemption. Hey, here's my design. I'd like to consider something more. We have approved past that before.
but based on that unless language. I think that sets a hard line, fairly hard line. You could do residences. Instead of shall be considered out of scale. Shall, you could be should.
I guess I'm not opposed to a hard line. Either.
What was the origin of that 2,000 square foot?
But it has been popular or unpopular. I think people like the idea of limiting structure sizes in Trinidad for the most part, unless they're designed there.
So I read this a little bit differently.
Okay.
I read it to say that that only applies to multiple family dwellings or commercial buildings that are more than 4,000 square feet.
But the first part is residences of more than 2,000 square.
And multiple family.
Well, okay, the way I was interpreting was that it was just referring to multifamily dwellings and commercial buildings would be considered out of scale unless they were designed, blah, blah, blah. So, I mean, in the residence of okay.
So the current language doesn't have the ratios in there, so it's just residences of more than 2,000 square feet or commercial buildings of more than 4,000 square feet. So it's a little bit more clear that unless applies to. I think the intent is that it applies.
Can you refresh me, Trevor, on the floor? That's floor to lot area, right? Is that ratio? So in theory, if one has a large enough lot and they meet that ratio, then they're not held to the 2,000 already, right? So that option is already in there if your lot is kind of big enough to support a structure of that size.
There are not a lot of new houses that have gone in the last this in here that are under
I'm sorry, that are under.
yeah.
Yeah, right.
So there have been some remodels. Probably that might still be less. Of the year.
I guess my concern is looking, downrange is the creep of right up against the setbacks. And I think it's perhaps a good idea to preserve the character of the town to consider a hard line on the size of structure. Whether or not 2,000 is the right number, we could certainly have that discussion, but just because we can and have, I guess that's where my concern kicks in. There's also quite a few very small lots in town. You could squeeze it and get your ratio and maximize your 25 foot, and what do you end up with?
Most people are pretty close to at least the 25%. Or if they're under most houses have been under 25%. But I think that the planning commission has taken a stance on some houses and required them to be reduced. Because there also tends to be issues as when there's a large structure. So now would you have as much, because there's a lot of public interest and opposition if there's view blockage, but if there wasn't view blockage, would you still feel the same ability to limit the house size? But I do think the planning commission has or require, because some of it, I know, I don't want to encourage things that there was just before I started, the house was built, was basically a 2, and I think the planning commission was taking a harder line at that time. And so what they did is they built a 2,000 square foot house on top of the 2,000 square foot garage. Garage doesn't count. What is the same? Does not have a part line? I don't know. But we will be revisiting our definitions of floor area probably in size. But that's one thing to think about is how do you include garages that are included in this?
How do we write requirements that fit, because Trinidad's unique, right? Our city limits have very, I know you guys have talked about neighborhoods in the past, where they want to, there's the kind of concentrated city section, and then there's other areas where there's more room where it might be more appropriate.
I'm not necessarily opposed to taking a hard line on the Darren's suggesting square footage of the house size. Obviously someone can build a big old garage, but I do think about it in my neighborhood, like there are a lot of undeveloped lots, especially out of the back. Certainly plenty of room to build a big house, but I think that the Florida area ratio would sort of be like their saving grace in that instance. So I'm fine, or I'm into making it a harder line, I guess.
So in your area though, it's 10%. Which is a 2,000 square foot house and 20,000. And the lot sizes do vary.
And we don't even address the SR zone here.
That's the 10% in SR zone.
Oh, I'm sorry. Ratio of more than 25% in the UR and PDs. Oh, SRs. Excuse me. Losing the thread on this one. Okay, I got it.
I think that it encourages creative thought. I can see it's something stepping down, something narrow, it steps down the hill, not being invasive to the neighbors. And, you know, it encourages creative thought. But if you take it out, it's still creative thought because they have to jump through the hoops for the city to build it.
I mean, I think the shall in there is pretty strong. It is a hard line, because you were saying they could come to you and ask for an exception. That is the exception. So if you take out the unless, I don't think there's an exception. But the shall is sort of a hard line, but the unless gives you that little room for an exception.
We can leave it as is and park it for thought and discussion down the road. I mean, I hear your point, Trevor, but if we've got a hard line shall, why put an exception in? You know,
There's always exceptions.
there's always exceptions, you know, and in my short tenure on the planning commission, there have been projects before us that we've denied based off the size of projects we've approved that were over it. And I guess part of my goal with this is to make it more clear to someone, what can I do? Why was it okay there? They did it. Why? Eliminate some of that concern or that gray for an applicant to go through the headache of getting a design, thinking here, I'm doing the same thing was approved there, coming to us with like, neat idea, no. Which is what the planning commission does. I get that. But I'm comfortable leaving it as is and coming back to it at a later date, or we can, I mean, the language clearly it allows us to do what we feel is right for the community, the way it's written as a commission.
And I do think that garages should somehow be considered in square footage. The floor area is currently defined to exclude garages. So either we change the definition of floor area or we use a different term.
Did we do lot coverage?
That's the 25%. So that's any building footprint, but we don't have that currently in the ordinance.
But we will with this. So you're suggesting somehow adding that kind of into the 2,000 square foot thing, you grab it there, okay?
No, let me put it in the parking lot for right now, and we can come back to this. And there'll probably be some other controversies that we'll need to look at again. I mean, I'd rather spend a lot of time on this document right now because this is so important. So I'm fine with this. Noodle on a little bit.
And I do think that this is one of the primary criteria that so it isn't a basic plan.
So then let's just put in garage. The structure, just call it a structure.
I think it's the definition of floor area is what is the key here. Because I was thinking, oh, we'll just call it residential structures, but I think it's the definition of floor area that excludes garages. And we have to fix that or use it. So, you know, maybe there's a living area. Say the building code defines habitable space, for example. And that's basically how floor area is currently defined. It's a little bit different.
Any idea how 2,000 square feet and 25% compare with other small coastal developments?
There are very few, I don't know if I've ever seen an ordinance that limits. Probably some, I think, limits on house size that I've seen anywhere in there. There are, and then there are some ordinances that prevent the big box retail. Trinidad was way ahead of its time on that here. So it's not a common, the size limit is not very common. The floor area ratio is, and I think it very much depends on it's more commonly used in urban areas, and it's usually
The city of Mendocino, I was thinking of another small coastal that,
I can look for other examples.
see what they have, I don't know, just relatively compact.
And then, of course, septic requirements are gonna limit.
Sure. Okay, having maybe set this aside for the time being, anything else on 5? 6. Seven. 8.
Go on 7K1 comma after minimize. I think.
Nelson 7. Eight. Editorial comment, and I'm not hard over on it, but items 1 and let's see, items 1 and 4 under M. Trying to follow all the changes here. To me, just felt like there was an awful lot of redundancy there, but I'm not going to make a big deal, but talk a lot about pervious and hard surfaces, etc. Anything else on 8? Page 9.
You're gonna add in something, Trevor, about the
Native drought tolerant vegetation, yes, so note to add.
Okay, that is through the review of that document, and very quickly, I'll open it up for public comment. Hearing none, seeing none, we'll bring it back to the commission. Any further comments, etc. Okay, and I think the consensus is that we want to take a look at this again, so. Good job. Okay, sorry, excuse me. Next item on our agenda is commissioner reports. Are there any commissioners who would like to report on any issues, items? Okay, and next item is staff report.
Don't have any new or updated applications, although I'm working with a couple of people on. So. Otherwise, I work on the SB2 and LEAP task, so put together the data, graphs and tables and figures for the parking data, parking study. We started to do some of the other LCP update tasks, visitor services study. I sent out another note to tribes with the cultural resources element, asking
Could I just make a comment there? I'm wondering, and maybe you've already done this, should we perhaps request the city council to make a formal request? Tribal consultation?
Well, at this point, I want informal, staff. It's
Not
possible.
that is what I'm saying.
Oh.
And no one's going to,
I think we will. So I did hear from Sherry Humboldt today. She's pushing to get someone to respond. And I think Jackie was at the council meeting and said, usually the rancher is pretty responsive. It's like, do you think I'm starting to get a little bit?
I just wanted to, if we needed to, get a little bit more pressure on, seeing if we can move that on. Okay.
Otherwise, the OPC, we're working on the coastal hazards plan, putting some public input. So there's a lot of stuff going on in the background with grant projects, pipeline replacement projects, things like that. So this is kind of like an iceberg right now. The meetings is so as you saw with our planning priorities, so are we going to present the planning priorities at the next week's meeting?
It sounded like we were going to.
That meeting's not on the city council calendar or the city calendar. Is there a meeting next week?
I think there is.
It's the normal second city council. Planning commission, STR.
Yeah, I'm not sure that it's on the website either.
Yeah, I don't think it is. It's not on the calendar.
Let's see, or at least last time.
So
Trevor, is that the priorities? Is that something you're gonna present or?
Yeah.
That would be the 24th, right?
Next Tuesday, right?
Yeah.
Anything else?
No, that's it.
Okay.
Are you still working on, I think we had talked about some kind of document that captures where different projects are? Like color coding or just like at the coastal commission and waiting for it.
Like a Gantt chart.
Something, yeah, just a summary, just to kind of primer to know all the iron we have in the fire and where they are respectively. Is that realistically feasible or is that just overwhelming?
I guess it depends on how much detail you want.
Just kind of where things, I was thinking like where these things are in the
So
process.
I mean, some of that was in the planning report.
Yeah,
So are you thinking about a different way to sort of, maybe a table to sort of highlight
Yeah.
that?
just a little bit
A
easier for,
summary table?
it might help the council understand where things are, because I know they have a lot of concern over the pace of progress. Where things are, allow them to kind of easily understand, oh, this is, planning commission's done with their first shot of this, it's now waiting for.
Yeah, it would be nice to have that for next week. If doable.
Yeah, I just thought of the packet for that, so yeah.
Okay, and then the last agenda item, of course, no, not the last, but the next one is future agenda items. And does anyone have any changes or any additions or anything that?
One question, committee assignments for the planning commission, we didn't do that tonight. Diane vacated a spot on the STR.
Oh, yeah, that's a good point.
I don't know that we can do anything with it since we did the agenda, is it tonight?
Not tonight, but I can
tonight.
put that on the next agenda.
We'll do it next. Right.
Also, I wanted to, Richard, at the last meeting, you brought up the schools, the digital sign and that
Yes.
6-month review. So I did get the little bit more formal user manual from Elise, and she will be at the, I'll put that on the next agenda. She'll be at the meeting. So ask around town what people thought about that in the sun.
On the future agenda items, rainwater catchment, where do we're just kind of looking for a design or where?
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing what we've talked about trying to do, and I think we're actually going to be there. The city actually has budget left and it's still not agreement. There was rainwater catchment originally in the grant, and then we took it out and been able to put it back in. So I think the idea is, one, to do a demonstration project, but also two, to do some sort of pre-approved design, so that people can more easily.
Anything else on future agenda items? Any other last minute comments?
Yeah, well, I appreciate Trevor getting the packet together a week early. I since realized that's because you're on vacation, but I personally really liked having, I only just happened to get it early on accident, but having the extra time to review the packet was really helpful. Especially because oftentimes if I'm out of town the weekend for the meeting, it's a Monday.
It's now you read the packet. Sometimes at meetings and not Trinidad meetings. They're pretty interesting, but other meetings. Yeah, you know, it depends on the scheduling of things. You know, a lot of times when it's an application, I'm waiting to get stuff from an applicant and that can push me back. But a lot of times it's really just a mindset, and I just have a mindset of getting things done earlier instead of waiting till. So I can try and get it.
Yeah, I mean, I would appreciate it. I'm not trying to like turn the screws on. But yeah.
No, it is nice because sometimes it's pretty meaty stuff to really kind of ponder and think and reach back for a couple of questions, you know.
Okay, anything else? Any other comments? All right. If
Motion
not,
to adjourn.
we're adjourned. Congratulations.
Yeah, thanks. Big shoes. Glad to be right next to me.
Man.
Recording